I glanced at the clock, feeling the pressure mount as the deadline neared. My heart raced, but I managed to hit send just in time. Relief washed over me. Finally, I had delivered. My name is Maggie, and from as far back as I can remember, art has been my sanctuary. As a child, I filled sketchbooks with crayon drawings of everything I saw, from the sky to my daydreams. As I grew older, my tools evolved into colored pencils, then digital tablets. What began as a childhood hobby has now become my livelihood. I'm a freelance illustrator, working at my own pace, creating images that bring stories to life. When I was a student, I used to draw part-time to make a little extra money. Those early illustrations in school publications laid the foundation for my current career. Now, I'm fortunate enough to do what I love every day, creating illustrations and comics. I draw modern women and their everyday lives for fashion magazines, and I get to tell stories that connect with readers. It's fulfilling, to say the least. My editor often tells me, "Maggie, your drawings get so much positive feedback." Those words always push me forward, especially on the tougher days. It was through this job that I met Daniel, my husband. He held a key role in one of the major publishing companies we worked with. At first, our interactions were purely professional. He was kind, thoughtful, but we didn't really connect beyond work. However, as we spent more time together, talking over projects and occasionally sharing stories from our personal lives, I began to see a side of Daniel that mirrored my own. We both lost our fathers early in life. It was this shared pain that formed a bridge between us. Before we knew it, we were having dinners, catching movies, and our bond deepened into something neither of us had expected. One evening, after we had finished dinner at a cozy restaurant, Daniel took a deep breath and told me something that caught me off guard. "Maggie," he said, his voice soft but serious, "I think I'm falling in love with you." I had never been in a relationship before, so I wasn't sure how to respond. "You like me, but I'm just an illustrator." "I don't stand out," I muttered, feeling a bit insecure. Daniel smiled gently. "You're more than that. You're talented, and you have this quiet strength I admire." His words struck a chord deep within me, and from that moment, my life began to shift. We dated for a few years before deciding to get married. Our relationship was built on mutual respect and shared experiences, and I knew that Daniel was someone I could trust with my heart. After our wedding, life was peaceful. We had our own little routines, balancing work and spending time together. It felt like a perfect new beginning. But as we approached our 30s, the inevitable questions about starting a family surfaced. I hadn't thought about it much, but Daniel was ready to talk about it. Around that same time, something else came up, something I didn't see coming. One evening, after a long day, Daniel sat beside me, his expression unusually serious. "Maggie," he began slowly, "my mom's been feeling really lonely. She's asked if she can move in with us." His words hung in the air for a moment before I responded. "Move in with us?" "Now?" I asked, not sure how to feel. I had met Linda, his mother, only a few times, and our relationship was polite but distant. The idea of living with her was unsettling. Daniel explained further. "She's been living alone for a while, and since Dad passed away, I haven't been able to visit her as much. She's really struggling." He looked at me with hopeful eyes, and I felt a tug in my chest. Having grown up in a single-parent household myself after losing my father, I understood what loneliness felt like. "All right," I agreed. "She can move in. We'll make it work." At first, everything seemed to fall into place. Linda was polite, helpful even. She took on many of the household chores, which gave me more time to focus on my work. I thought we were finding a good balance. I was grateful for her support, especially during those late nights when I was working on tight deadlines. But soon, subtle changes in her behavior began to surface. It started with small comments. "Maggie, shouldn't you be helping more around the house?" she'd say, while I was buried in work on my tablet. I explained to her that my job required long hours and intense focus, but she never seemed to take my work seriously. "You just sit there drawing all day," she'd mutter, shaking her head. "That's not real work." No matter how many times I explained that my illustrations were my career, not just a hobby, she refused to accept it. The tension between us grew, especially after Daniel was transferred to another region for work. He had to move for the job, leaving me to live alone with Linda. Before he left, he reassured me, "Maggie, if it gets too difficult with my mom, just tell me, and we'll figure something out." I promised him I'd manage, but it wasn't long before things started to unravel. With Daniel gone, Linda's behavior became more openly hostile. She began criticizing everything I did, or didn't do, in her eyes. "You're freeloading," she snapped one afternoon when I was working on a project. "Daniel's the one providing for this household, not you." Her words stung, especially since I had been contributing a significant portion of my earnings to the household expenses each month. I felt trapped, unable to reason with her, and too worn out to keep explaining myself. One day, things reached a breaking point. Linda called me into the living room, where Daniel's brother, Ben, and his wife, Claire, were waiting. As soon as I stepped into the room, they began mocking me. "Still drawing on that tablet, huh?" Ben sneered. His wife, Claire, added with a smug grin, "Must be nice to live here rent-free, doing nothing." I opened my mouth to defend myself, but before I could say a word, Linda stormed over, grabbed my tablet, and smashed it onto the floor. The sound of it shattering echoed through the room, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. That tablet was my livelihood. Without it, I couldn't work. Claire and Ben just laughed as Linda stood over me, her face twisted with anger. That night, I called Daniel, tears streaming down my face as I told him what had happened. He was silent for a long time before finally saying, "I'm so sorry, Maggie. I didn't know things had gotten this bad." He apologized over and over, but it wasn't his fault. "I need to leave," I said quietly. "I can't stay here any longer." The next day, I started packing. I was ready to move out and be with Daniel, far away from the toxicity of his family. But just as I was about to leave, Linda approached me, her tone suddenly sweet. "Maggie," she said, her voice dripping with false kindness, "we didn't realize how much you've been contributing to the household. Please don't leave. We need you here." I looked at her, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. It was too late for apologies. I had made my decision. "I'm leaving," I replied firmly. "I've already made up my mind." As I continued to pack, something strange happened. Linda admitted that she hadn't been using the money I contributed for household expenses. Instead, she'd been spending it on her own personal indulgences, nightclubs, expensive dinners, and shopping sprees. I was speechless. All this time, I had been working hard, thinking I was supporting the household, while she was living it up behind my back. After I left, things began to spiral out of control for Linda and the rest of Daniel's family. Relatives found out about her reckless spending, and soon, she was the subject of scandal and judgment within the family. She and Ben were forced to sell the house to cover her debts, and Claire, tired of the drama, left him. Linda ended up living with Ben, who was barely scraping by. Their once stable lives were crumbling before their eyes. Meanwhile, Daniel and I started fresh. We moved to a peaceful, small town, far from the chaos, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe again. Not long after we settled in, we were blessed with our first child, a beautiful baby girl who filled our lives with joy. It was a new chapter, and I was ready to embrace it. My career also began to flourish. I turned my experiences with Linda into a comic series, and it resonated deeply with readers, especially those who had dealt with difficult family dynamics. It was cathartic to put it all on paper, and the comic was met with overwhelming support. But as for Linda, her life had taken a steep downward turn. She was now living with Ben, who was struggling to keep his head above water. They were both in debt, and Linda's once glamorous lifestyle had come crashing down. Every so often, I'd hear about their troubles through the family grapevine. It was hard not to feel some sympathy for them, but at the same time, I knew they had brought this on themselves. Looking back, I realized that leaving wasn't just about escaping Linda's toxic behavior. It was about reclaiming my life. Daniel and I were happier than we had ever been, and I was finally able to work without the constant stress that had been suffocating me for so long. In the end, the storm had passed, and we were left standing, stronger than before. The peace we found in our new home, the joy of raising our child, and the success of my comic were all reminders that sometimes walking away from toxic situations is the best thing you can do.